For years, Thad Merrick, a battle-worn veteran searching for quiet, found his only peace in the steady routines he shared with Rune, the aging German shepherd who had survived just as many storms as he had. But one frozen morning, everything changed. Rune, normally disciplined and calm, suddenly ignored every command, pulling Thad away from their familiar path and toward the abandoned ghost town of Ash Hollow. His amber eyes carried an urgency Thad had not seen since their days in uniform. Deep inside the ruins, beneath the floorboards of an old bank, Rune uncovered something no one expected, a rusted tin box holding a woman's silver wedding band marked with the initials of someone long missing. If this story moves you, please support us by subscribing and joining our channel for more. Winter pressed its white silence over the Colorado highlands, a hard and breathless cold settling into every abandoned structure of the land. Thaddeus "Thad" Merrick moved through it with the worn steadiness of a man long acquainted with storms, external and internal alike. At 49, he carried a weathered look shaped by desert suns and battlefield nights, tall, broadly built across the shoulders, his beard a thick blend of black and gray that framed a face marked by angular cheekbones and a deep scar that cut softly across his jaw like a whisper of old violence. His dark brown eyes held a perpetual tiredness beneath their grit, a heaviness born not of age but of memory. He lived alone by choice, tucked inside a creaking wooden cabin hours from any paved road, clinging to solitude as if it were the last safe harbor after a lifetime of sinking ships. His only companion was Rune, a 9-year-old German shepherd with a coat of mottled sable and ash, a grizzled muzzle, and an intelligence sharpened by years as a K-9 in military service. Rune was large, muscular, with alert amber eyes that seemed carved from old metal, eyes that watched Thad the way a soldier watches his last remaining brother in arms. Rune moved with disciplined precision, yet carried the faint stiffness of age and old injuries, a slight hitch in his left hind leg from shrapnel removed years ago, and the lingering wariness of a dog who had heard too many explosions to ever truly sleep deeply again. This morning, the pair descended from their mountain cabin toward the ghost town of Ash Hollow, a settlement once alive with silver miners, but now reduced to a row of decaying buildings, leaning against each other like drunks frozen mid-collapse. The wind slithered through broken windows and around rusted signs, producing a hollow, almost human moan that curled down the spine. Thad came here sometimes when thoughts pressed too tightly against his skull, when the ghosts of his past, those he saved and those he failed, grew loud enough to drown out the quiet life he was trying to build. Ash Hollow reminded him that silence could exist without peace. He liked that honesty. But Rune was different today. Normally, the dog trotted alongside him with a calm, surveying gait, checking corners the way he once had in desert villages. Yet halfway down the snow-buried main street, Rune stiffened. His ears shot upward, his pupils tightened to sharp bronze points. Then, without warning, he pulled hard on the leash. "Easy, boy," Thad muttered, gripping the strap with both hands. But Rune was no longer listening. A deep, rumbling growl built in the dog's chest. Not the explosive bark of alarm, but the low warning tone he used only when he sensed something alive, something wrong. The German shepherd dragged Thad toward the old Ash Hollow bank, the largest building in town, though it now leaned as if exhausted. Its once grand wooden columns warped and splitting, its windows punched out like empty eye sockets. The stone steps were a sheet of ice, slick and blue beneath the gray morning. Rune bounded up anyway, claws scraping, tail rigid as a spear. Thad followed, pulse tightening with the instinctive readiness of a former soldier. Rune ducked behind the cracked counter where tellers once counted silver coins, now just a shelf of splintered wood bloated from decades of moisture. The dog began pawing at the floorboards, hard, frantic, throwing up flakes of rotten timber and dust thick enough to cloud the air. Thad felt tension coil through him. Rune never behaved like this unless he was tracking something human or something dead. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered, voice steady, though his breath misted with unease. Thad knelt, shoved aside a warped section of flooring, and uncovered a metal ring embedded in one board. A hidden hatch. It groaned open under his weight, releasing a breath of cold, stale air, smelling of mold, iron, and something faintly acidic. A wooden staircase descended into darkness, the bank's forgotten basement. Rune slipped down first, moving low, ears back. Thad followed, flashlight cutting through the dark like a surgical blade. The basement was small, cell-like, its stone walls sweating moisture. Filing cabinets lay collapsed in corners, their insides spilled like metal skeletons. Rune sniffed carefully around the debris, then stopped at a rusted tin box half buried beneath a collapsed shelf. He nudged it with his nose, whining softly, a rare sound of unease from a dog shaped by war. Thad lifted the box. The lid resisted, then clicked open with a brittle snap. Inside lay a small silver wedding band, tarnished but intact, wrapped in a strip of cloth. The fabric was frayed, stained, but the stitching was unmistakable. Uneven, jagged letters sewn by a trembling hand, Alara Q. Thad's heart clenched. The name cut through him like a sudden winter gust. Sheriff Luther Bragg had spoken of her, a missing girl no older than 23, slight, dark-haired, with gentle hazel eyes, last seen hitchhiking near Black Ridge Road before a winter storm swallowed her trail. Some said she ran away. Some whispered darker things. Luther himself had confessed he believed she was dead. Thad stared at the ring, his pulse echoing in his ears. He imagined slender fingers forcing the cloth together by candlelight, imagined desperation guiding each uneven stitch. And somewhere inside that vision, uninvited but relentless, came the face of a young medic Thad once failed to save. Her hands shaking, her voice cracking as she whispered her name, asking him not to forget her if he made it home. He had remembered. Too well. The cold basement felt suddenly smaller, pressing against him with the weight of all the things he couldn't undo. Rune nudged his knee, sensing the shift in his breathing. "It's her," Thad whispered. She was here. Above them, wind howled through the broken windows like a warning or a plea. Thad closed the box gently, though his jaw had set with the grim certainty of a man who had just found his next mission. The ghosts of Ash Hollow were no longer just the town's. They were his now, and he would not leave them buried. The wind outside the ruined bank keened like a wounded thing, slipping through every fractured window as Thad Merrick stood in the basement's stale cold and forced himself to breathe evenly. His gloved hands tightened around the rusted tin box containing Alara Quinn's ring. Rune pressed against his leg, the dog's rigid posture and prickled hackles telling him this place had held more than just dust and forgotten papers. Thad reached into his coat for the small radio clipped to his vest. "Luther, it's Merrick," he said, his voice a low rasp. "I found something. You're going to want to get out here. Bring everyone." Sheriff Luther Bragg's voice came back through static, steady, gravelly, tinged with the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had seen too many winters and too many failures. "On my way. 15 minutes. Don't touch a damn thing." Luther was a broad man in his early 60s, his gray beard thick and square-cut, his pale blue eyes set deep beneath heavy brows. He moved slower these days, his right knee ruined after a suspect had slammed a steel door into it years ago. But despite the limp, Luther remained a man who carried authority like a coat he never took off. While waiting, Thad kept searching the basement with Rune. The dog's nose swept the ground in a meticulous, practiced arc, muscles tensing and releasing with each slow step. Rune paused by a splintered pallet pushed into a corner, its slats warped and softened by time. Under the beam of Thad's flashlight, he could now see it wasn't debris, it was a makeshift bed. A tattered wool blanket lay balled beside it, stiff with grime and old cold. Above it, the once white ceiling was stained with soot, a black blossom spreading outward where someone had lit an oil burner for warmth. The realization slid through Thad like ice. Someone had lived down here long enough to seek comfort, long enough for blankets and soot and a sense of ownership, long enough for hope to die. Footsteps crunched overhead as law enforcement vehicles arrived. Moments later, light spilled down the stairwell in harsh white beams. Sheriff Luther descended first, his breath fogging in front of him. Behind him came two forensic technicians, both bundled in heavy winter parkas beneath their Tyvek suits, and then a woman whose presence changed the feel of the room instantly. Agent Miriam Locke. Miriam Locke was in her late 30s with short black hair tucked behind her ears and skin the deep brown shade of polished walnut. Her face was sharp, angular, elegant in a severe way, with eyes like flint and a posture that radiated quiet authority. She was tall, slender, but athletic, wearing a dark insulated jacket over tactical trousers and boots, her badge clipped to her belt. Miriam was the kind of woman who never wasted a movement and never raised her voice unless she wanted someone to regret their decisions. She surveyed the basement with narrowed eyes. "This is more than a dump site," she said softly. Thad nodded. Someone lived here for a while. As the forensics team began photographing and dusting surfaces, Rune suddenly moved again, trotting toward a wall of old brick. His nails clicked on the stone floor. He sniffed, then pressed his nose hard against a single brick that sat slightly crooked in its bed. "What's he got?" Miriam murmured, stepping closer. Thad crouched and brushed dust from the brick. It wobbled under his fingers, a loose piece. Carefully, he pulled it free. Behind it, tucked in a shallow cavity, was something wrapped in yellowed plastic. The room went completely silent. Thad eased the package out and laid it on the cold concrete. Miriam knelt beside him, snapping on fresh gloves. Together they peeled back the plastic and revealed a small notebook, the cover faded green, edges warped from moisture, though protected enough to survive. Across the front, in shaky blue ink, were the words, "Fairy Tale of the Princess of the Frozen Town" by E.Q. Miriam exhaled a slow breath. "Alara Quinn," she whispered. She opened to the first page carefully. The handwriting was uneven, jagged, uncertain, the script of someone writing in poor light, someone whose hands trembled either from fear or cold, or both. Day 12. The Ice King says I belong to him now. The frozen town is my castle. The dark is my room. I don't remember the sound of warm voices anymore. Thad felt the words sink into him like a stone. Each page was more harrowing than the last. Ilara described a man she called the Ice King, a shadow in a heavy coat who kept her underground so the world wouldn't steal her away. She wrote of nights without fire, of muffled footsteps above, of being told she was a wife chosen by purity. She described meals left without a word, the silence of captivity, the way she learned to stop asking for help because no one ever came. Miriam's face was rigid, jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched near her ear. "This wasn't a runaway," she said. "This was abduction, long-term, controlled, deliberate." Luther Bragg crossed his thick arms, the deepening furrow in his brow revealing a rare flicker of emotion. "God help that girl." Rune pawed again, not at the wall this time, but at the floor near the makeshift bed. Miriam moved the pallet aside. Underneath lay two empty water jugs, positioned directly beneath a hairline crack in the wall where melted snow had seeped through, drop by drop. "Water catchment," Thad murmured quietly. Miriam nodded. "Someone taught her this. This is survival training. You don't learn this on your own." They found rope fibers embedded in the pallet legs, fibers that matched the faint marks on the wood where restraints had been tied, and on the blanket near the edge, the faintest scorch mark, shaped like a cigarette ember. "These ashes are recent," said one of the forensic techs, a lean man with sandy hair and wire rims, glasses whose name tag read J. Trombley. maybe 2 or 3 months old. Miriam straightened slowly. She wasn't just held here last year, she said. She was held here recently. Someone came back. The thought hung in the air, heavy as the cold. Luther rubbed his beard, voice low. We need to find out who the hell used this place. Thad's eyes drifted again to the diary. From the midpoint onward, the writing changed. The trembling lines grew firmer. The tone shifted. Fear gave way to something else. Defiance. Ilara wrote of 2 imaginary figures, the Snow Knight and the Silver Wolf. The knight was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar across his jaw and eyes that looked tired but warm. The wolf was old but strong, a creature of loyalty and fire hidden under winter's fur. Thad felt a shock ripple beneath his ribs. She had invented heroes, not to save her, but to keep her sane. He glanced at Rune, who sat at his heel, eyes bright and unblinking. She made stories, Miriam said softly, to keep her mind alive. Then she looked at Thad, and something unspoken passed between them. Ilara had imagined a knight and a wolf. Now, in a strange twist of fate, she had found them. But the girl wasn't here. She had been moved, or taken again, or worse. As the team worked, Thad wandered to the stairs. He looked up at the thin sliver of sky through the broken windows. Snow was falling harder now, thicker flakes drifting sideways on a rising wind. The ghosts of Ash Hollow whispered around him, begging to be noticed. Luther approached, his limp pronounced on the uneven floor. "You did good calling us," he said gruffly. "Some folks would have walked away." Thad didn't answer. He couldn't. He felt the weight of Ilara's words pressing against him, the shape of her fear sketched inside his chest. Rune leaned against his leg, sensing the turmoil. Miriam Locke stepped beside him. "We're not done here," she said. "This site isn't just evidence, it's a message." Her dark eyes cut toward the hatch. "Someone hid her here, someone came back for her, and whoever that someone is, they're not finished." Outside, wind screamed against the old wooden walls of Ash Hollow Bank. Inside, Thad Merrick understood with a cold, steady clarity that the ring he had found was not a relic of a dead girl. It was the beginning of a trail he had no intention of abandoning. The storm clouds thickened above Ash Hollow, turning the abandoned town into a white maze of drifting ice and bitter wind, as Sheriff Luther Bragg stood beside the broken windows of the old bank and told Thad Merrick a name he had hoped never to speak again. Malachi Dorn. Even saying it felt like stirring a ghost. Malachi was a man spoken of in half-jokes and half-fears around the valley, a reclusive survivalist who had lived on the outskirts of Ash Hollow for over 20 years. He was tall, gaunt, his beard a tangle of iron gray that spilled over his chest, and his mismatched eyes, one pale, one hazel, saw malice in every invention of the modern world. He believed electricity poisoned the mind, believed machines eroded the soul, believed cities were graveyards of the living. For most residents, he was simply a local myth wandering the tree line. For Luther, he was a nuisance. For those few unlucky enough to speak with him, he was a chilling conviction wrapped inside human skin. Thad felt Rune bristle, as if the dog recognized the shift in the sheriff's tone. Luther's limp was more pronounced today, either from the cold or the weight of what he was about to say. "He was always odd," Luther muttered, rubbing his beard. "But these last years, something in him cracked. Folks saw him coming down the mountain with salt, bullets, kerosene, but also things he never needed." Agent Miriam Locke stepped closer, flipping open her tablet as snow hissed against the shattered glass behind her. Her sharp features were more severe in the cold light, her dark eyes gleaming with the thrill of a trail finally opening. "We pulled every purchase record from the valley's supply shops," she said. "Matches, ammo, kerosene, expected. But then antibiotics, multivitamins, women's thermals, notebooks, children's lined paper, shampoo, items Malachi could not have used alone." She rotated the screen toward Thad and Luther. On the display were scanned receipts, margins filled with notes in looping blue ink. "What's that handwriting?" Thad asked. Matches another missing person, Miriam said. Dr. Corin Hayes. The name pulled a shadow across the room. Dr. Corin Hayes had once been a respected hydrologist for the Colorado Environmental Agency. A woman in her early 50s, sharp-minded, intense, with a wiry frame and long, black streaked with silver hair, she always tied low at her neck. Her skin was a pale olive tone, usually hidden beneath field jackets and survey gear, and she had dark, deep-set eyes that rarely softened. Before tragedy struck, she had been driven, brilliant, blunt, someone who believed data more than people. After tragedy, she believed nothing except grief. 6 years ago, her husband and 9-year-old daughter were killed in a sudden flood when an upstream dam malfunctioned. Corin blamed the federal agency, the construction company, the cars on the highway, the world, everything. The grief gutted her. She went from public hearings to frantic letters, from letters to rants, and then, one day, she vanished. No forwarding address, no digital footprint, nothing. Now they had her handwriting. She found Malachi, Miriam said. Or he found her, and he fed her grief. He fed it until it became ideology. Thad felt a coldness deeper than winter settle under his ribs. Rune whined softly. Miriam continued, scrolling through more evidence. Corin had the knowledge to reroute water, build storage caches, create escape paths. She would have understood natural cover, thermal shadows, old ventilation structures. She could have built a place to keep someone alive without anyone noticing. Thad's jaw tightened as he looked at the receipts, evidence of captivity masked as supplies. She helped him. She rationalized it, Miriam corrected. To her, the world had failed her child. Malachi gave her language for that pain. If the world kills the innocent, we must shelter the chosen. That's what she wrote on a pamphlet taped to one of his purchases. Luther swore under his breath. Hell. Moments later, a deputy hurried down the stairs. Sheriff, they're ready. Cass Dorn is awake. Cassandra Cass Dorn, Malachi's niece, sat in the interrogator's chair wrapped in a borrowed sheriff's blanket, her wrists loosely cuffed. She was 23, short and slight, with pale skin and long strawberry blonde hair matted from cold and months of fear. Her face had the fragile softness of someone who had never been built for a life of survivalism. Cass had always been different from Malachi's world, gentler, anxious, too easily frightened, the kind of girl who apologized when someone stepped on her foot. She had been found hiding near the outskirts of Ash Hollow, shivering, terrified, and almost delirious. When Miriam entered the room, Cass flinched. When Thad entered, Rune at his side, she froze entirely, eyes darting between the two in fear and awe, as though she mistook them for the heroes from the stories Elara had written. Cassandra, Miriam said softly, lowering herself into a chair. You know why you're here. We need the truth now, not later. Cass swallowed hard, her voice thin as spider silk. I didn't want to help him. I swear it. He said I owed him for raising me after my dad died. He said the world was poison. He made me help him watch the trails. Cass, Luther said gently, we need to know about Elara. Cass's eyes filled with tears so quickly it was as if she had been waiting for the name. He found her in the storm, she whispered, sobbing. Her car slid into a drift on Highway 14. It was one of those whiteout blizzards where the whole world disappears into snow. He brought her to the old cabin first. She was so scared. She kept begging him to take her home. He said he would, but he meant his home, not hers. Thad's hands clenched on the table's edge. He made her wear one of my aunt's old dresses, Cass continued. A wedding dress, yellowed lace. He called her the pure bride of the new world. He said it made her clean, untainted. Miriam exchanged a grim glance with Luther. And Dr. Hayes? Miriam asked. Cass nodded quickly, eyes terrified. Dr. Hayes said that society had corrupted every young woman except the ones they chose. She built everything, the escape tunnel, the stockpiles, the storage under the church, all of it. She called it preservation architecture. They were going to move when the snow thawed. To the high place. What high place? Thad demanded. Cass looked up, trembling. Not the ranger station like people think. They stopped using that years ago. They moved everything to the church. The old burnt-out chapel on the hill above Ash Hollow. The one with the stone bell tower. Dr. Hayes said the bell tower used to be a fire lookout in the 1930s. High enough to watch all trails. High enough to see trouble coming. Thad felt Rune press against him, sensing tension. Miriam leaned forward. Is Alara there now? Cass shook her head violently. No, they were preparing to move in the next storm. Malachi said storms hide footsteps. He said storms erase tracks. Snow battered the windows behind them, as if the mountain itself confirmed her words. And where is Dr. Hayes now? Miriam asked. But before Cass could answer, a gust of wind slammed against the building so hard the lights flickered. She's close, Cass whispered. She never leaves the snow. She says the world is loud, so she only feels safe when everything is white and quiet. The room fell silent. Outside, winter thickened. Inside, they realized Alara's captors were not running. They were preparing for the storm, preparing to move, and preparing to vanish, before anyone could stop them. The night had thickened into a swirling veil of white by the time Thad Merrick stood over the spread of old hydrology maps and brittle survey notes, recovered from Dr. Corin Hayes's cache. The abandoned church sat on the highest ridge overlooking Ash Hollow, its bell tower rising like a broken finger toward the storm-beaten sky. The structure had once been a fire lookout decades ago, long before the congregation abandoned the valley. There, in Alara's notebook, she had named it the High Choir, not for its height, but for the way the wind moaned through its rafters, like an unseen choir crying out in winter. Thad traversed the faded contour lines with a gloved finger, Rune pressed against his side. The German shepherd's fur bristled every time the wind rattled the window panes. Rune had sensed danger even before they knew the captors were there. Dogs like him always did. His 9-year-old muscles were slower with age, his left hind leg still stiff from old shrapnel scars, but his mind was sharp, his instincts razor-edged. Agent Miriam Locke stood opposite Thad, tightening the strap of her winter gear. She was compact, athletic, with sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes that gleamed with strategy even when her breath fogged in front of her. Her coat was thick but fitted, dyed a deep forest green, her black hair tightly braided down her back to avoid catching snow. A practical woman, hardened by years of work and a mind trained to dismantle chaos. We can't take a full team, Miriam said. The bell tower has a full panoramic view. If we bring a formation, they'll see us long before we reach the church. Luther Bragg nodded grimly. The sheriff's broad frame looked more exhausted than usual, and the limp in his right leg worsened whenever the temperature dropped. The injury came from an avalanche rescue years ago, one that cost him 2 deputies and most of the cartilage in his knee. Tonight he would not join the approach team. He would stay below as command. So, Miriam continued, a small infiltration group, me, Thad, Rune, and 2 tactical specialists. She gestured toward the 2 men standing by the wall, checking their suppressed rifles. The first, Ethan Crow, was a lean, hawk-eyed man in his late 30s, with sandy hair cropped short and a jawline hardened by years in covert mountain operations. He spoke little, his voice dry and efficient. The second, Isaac Morrell, was broader, powerfully built, with dark chocolate-brown skin and a soft-spoken calm that contrasted sharply with the precision of his hands. Isaac had a faint scar above his right eyebrow, an old rappel accident, and it gave his face a permanent expression of quiet contemplation. Crow handles Overwatch once we're in position, Miriam said. Morrell goes in with us. Thad nodded. Rune pressed closer, recognizing the shift in atmosphere, the hush before impact. By the time the team reached the cemetery behind the abandoned church, The storm had deepened into a near whiteout. Snow fell so heavily that tombstones became hunched silhouettes, and the iron gate moaned as the wind shoved it back and forth. The church itself was a hulking shadow on the hill, its wooden cross snapped in half, its stained glass windows shattered into teeth of colored ice. They moved low, stepping between gravestones, their boots breaking through crusts of ice. Rune guided Thad with a slow, careful walk. The dog felt the vibrations no human could hear, the faint tremors of movement inside the structure. Miriam stopped them at the back wall of the church, where rotten boards clung to rusty nails. Her voice was barely a whisper. Front doors nailed shut. Cass said there's a concealed trapdoor inside. That's our entry point. Thad nodded, pulling his scarf higher around his beard. His breath fogged, catching on the salt and pepper hairs that framed his worn face. Rune sniffed the boards, then leaned his weight forward, giving a low whine, not fear, but recognition. Thad understood him instantly. There was someone inside, and they were afraid. Crow climbed toward the ridge for overwatch. The remaining trio slipped into the broken side window, stepping onto warped floorboards, glazed with thin ice. The church interior was dark, except for a lantern glow spilling from beneath the boarded front doors. Dust danced in beams of dim moonlight that pierced the cracked roof. Morell found the trapdoor first. It was cleverly concealed under a rug of frayed wool, its edges dusted with snow that must have blown in through the broken rafters. The wood groaned as he lifted it, revealing a ladder leading upward into the base of the bell tower. Rune stiffened again, ears erect, body frozen. The hair along his spine rose in a ridge. Thad placed his palm on the dog's shoulder. Easy. They ascended in silence, climbing single file through the narrow passage carved inside the structure's bones. The boards groaned under their weight. Wind screamed through cracks above them, then voices, 2 of them. Corin Hayes' voice was sharp, shaking with urgency. Malachi, stop this. We need to move her now. Another storm is coming. If they find this place... The High Choir is the last sanctuary, Malachi hissed. His voice quivered with passion, his mismatched eyes likely gleaming with fanatic light. Here she becomes my eternal bride. Here the old world can't reach us. Ilara is freezing, Corin said, her tone fraying. This tower is nothing but rot. She will die. She will ascend, Malachi whispered. Rune emitted a low, grumbling growl so soft it vibrated through Thad's boots. Miriam signaled the breach. Morell kicked the final door. The world exploded into motion. Snow blasted into the open bell tower through broken slats. The lantern flame inside threw maddened shadows across the scene. Ilara Quinn was tied against the central support post beneath the massive bronze bell. She wore a threadbare gray-white wool dress, an old hand-darned thing Malachi believed to be pure. Her arms were bruised from rope burns, her lips blue with cold, her dark hair tangled around her pale face. The terror in her hazel eyes flickered between panic and desperate hope. Malachi Dorn turned, long coat swirling, beard whipping in the wind. His pale hand reached for the gun tucked into his belt. His mismatched eyes burned with furious devotion. But Rune was faster. The German shepherd lunged with a force that belied his age, slamming into Malachi's arm and sending the bullet into the wooden beam. Splinters rained down, and the old bell swayed with a metallic groan. Miriam and Morell took Malachi to the floor. Thad moved past them directly to Ilara. Dr. Corin Hayes didn't resist. She stood by the open window, staring into the storm like a statue carved from grief. Snow gathered in her hair, but she didn't blink. Merrick saw, just for an instant, the hollowed-out mother she had become. The woman who had once held a child in a flood, who had watched the world take everything from her, and had followed a madman because he spoke the language of her pain. It did not excuse her, but it explained her. Miriam cuffed her gently. Corin didn't even look away from the snow. Thad tore off his heavy outer coat, wrapping it around Ilara's trembling shoulders. She flinched at first, then leaned forward shakily as Rune pressed his body heat along her frozen legs. Thad crouched to shield her from the wind, blocking the broken window with his broad frame. His beard caught the snow as he lowered his head. "You're safe now," he whispered, voice the softest he had managed in years. "We've got you." Alara nodded weakly, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, the memory of war did not drown Thad. It steadied him. No explosions, no shadows rising from desert heat, only a single command that echoed through the years: "Don't lose another one." The storm howled, but it could not touch them now, because this time he had reached her in time. The weeks that followed the rescue unfolded beneath a gentler winter, the kind that softened rooftops with quiet snow, instead of sharpening the world into a blade. It was a season not of imprisonment, but of slow, fragile thaw, a winter where hearts melted far more reluctantly than ice. Alara Quinn remained in the small valley hospital, a pale silhouette in a quiet room painted with soft green walls. She was 25, slender, with long dark hair that fell around her shoulders in tangled waves. Her hazel eyes, once bright, once terrified, now drifted between exhaustion and distant thought. On her skin were the remnants of bruises fading to muted yellow, and on her wrists faint rope lines still lingered like shadows of chains. But the deepest wounds, the ones carved into her mind, were invisible and patient. Doctors treated her physically, warming blankets, IV fluids, gentle medication, but no instrument could measure the places where fear had settled. She startled at the clatter of metal trays. She recoiled at the deep ringing of church bells from miles away. Sometimes she woke at night with a gasp, gripping the blanket with shaking hands, lips trembling as if reciting vows she had been forced to memorize. But every few days she saw something that broke through the frost. Thad Merrick. He stood in the hallway outside her room, his broad flannel-covered shoulders leaning against the blue-painted wall, his salt and pepper beard catching flecks of afternoon light. His brown eyes, steady, lined with age and grief, always softened slightly when she appeared. Rune was usually beside him, sitting with regal patience, his sable and ash coat groomed by the nurses who adored him. His amber eyes monitored every sound, every footstep, every shift in Alara's breathing. The first time she saw them, she offered a small smile. It was thin, trembling, barely there, but it was the first unbroken thing she had given the world in months. And to Thad, it felt like watching a crack open in a long, frozen lake, sunlight reaching where darkness had conquered. Rune's tail beat once against the floor. To Alara, they were no longer imaginary archetypes from a desperate fairy tale. The Snow Knight and the Silver Wolf had stepped out of ink and into life. As winter crawled toward spring, the courthouse reopened in the valley. The trials were, as Miriam Locke put it, a necessary reckoning. Malachi Dorn appeared first, his tall skeletal frame draped in a prison jumpsuit that hung on him like a shed skin. His wild iron-gray beard had been trimmed, but his mismatched eyes, one pale, one hazel, still glowed with fanatic certainty. He showed no remorse. When the verdict was read, life in prison without parole, he whispered something under his breath about purity lost and the final choir. His voice was so faint it might have been the wind outside. Dr. Corin Hayes followed. Her once intense olive-toned face had drained of color. Her black and silver hair was tied neatly at the back, but grief clung to her like a second coat. She spoke little. The court acknowledged her severe psychological trauma, but her role in planning the abductions could not be excused. She received a long sentence, and as the gavel struck, she did not lift her eyes from the table. It was unclear whether she mourned her fate or the memory of the family she had lost to the flood years ago. Cass Dorn, small, strawberry blonde, frightened Cass, stood shaking before the judge. Her voice nearly broke as she recounted what she had been forced to witness. She had been another prisoner bound by fear, indoctrination, and Malachi's twisted manipulation. Her sentence was reduced, and when she was escorted out, she looked lighter, as though a stone she had carried from childhood had finally dropped. Ash Hollow, once a destination for adventurers seeking eerie photographs of ghost town ruins, was forever changed. Word spread of what had happened in that cold, forgotten place. Tourists avoided it, and locals whispered its name with a wary reverence. What had once seemed abandoned now felt haunted, not by spirits, but by the memory of human cruelty. Yet for Thad and Alara, the hollow held something else entirely. When Alara's strength returned, she asked to go back. Not to suffer, but to reclaim what had been twisted. Thad drove her there on a quiet morning dusted with new snow. The old truck rattled along the icy road, its heater humming unevenly. Rune stood in the back seat watching the white world pass by with alert eyes. When they arrived at the edge of Ash Hollow's main street, the town looked softer than it had the day of the rescue. Snow rested lightly on rooftops, wind whispered instead of howled, and the broken bank sign swung gently rather than groaning. They walked slowly through the silent street. Thad adjusted his worn flannel shirt beneath his thick winter coat as he kept a careful pace beside her. Rune trotted ahead, tail lifted, occasionally glancing back to make sure she followed. Alara's steps were tentative at first, but instead of clutching her arms in fear, she touched the snow-laden railings as if confirming the world was real and harmless. "The wind," she murmured, pausing as a gust swept through the abandoned saloon, making the wooden beams moan. "It doesn't sound like screaming anymore." Thad nodded. "It shouldn't. It's just wind. You give it the meaning you're ready for." She smiled faintly. I used to write about the choir of winter, in my notebook." "You did," he said softly, "and maybe now it can be a choir again." When they reached the old church hill, Alara stopped, not from fear, but from breathlessness, an emotional echo, a tremor of what once had been. Rune nudged her knee gently, his warm nose pressing reassurance into her skin. The bell tower no longer loomed, it simply stood. A place where horrors happened, yes, but no longer one that could claim her. Thad stood beside her, his broad frame steady, his beard catching a scattering of wind-blown snowflakes. He waited without speaking, giving her time to rewrite the memory. "Thad," she said quietly, I think I'm not a prisoner of this place anymore." His voice was a low rumble, warm despite its gravel. "You were never meant to be someone's captive bride, Alara. You were meant to choose your own life." She looked at him, eyes bright with something fragile but blooming. "Then maybe today I choose to start." Rune bumped her hand suddenly and licked her fingers, leaving a smear of warm dog breath that made her laugh, a soft, pure sound that broke like sunlight through cloud. It was the first laugh without tears since she had been saved. And in that moment, standing in the quiet ghost town, Thad realized something quietly profound. They were no longer just survivors tied by circumstances. The three of them, a weathered veteran, a young woman reclaiming her story, and an aging German shepherd with the heart of a warrior, were beginning to stitch themselves into a small, unexpected family. Ash Hollow no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a reminder that sometimes the journey to save someone else was the only road that could lead you back to yourself. And as they walked down the snowy main street, Rune bounding ahead, chasing clumps of snow like a joyful pup, the winter sun broke through the clouds, lighting the path home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder, shining wings, or heavenly fire. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in the courage of a wounded veteran, in the loyalty of an aging German shepherd, and in the fragile hope of a young woman who refused to let darkness write her final chapter. And maybe that is how God works in our world. Not always with grand signs from the sky, but through the hands we reach out to, the lives we choose to save, the love we dare to give even when our own hearts are tired. When Alara stepped out of the shadows of Ash Hollow, she didn't just survive, she was found. And in that moment, it felt as though God whispered, that no soul is ever too lost, no night too long, no winter too cold for him to guide someone toward the light again. In our everyday lives, we forget this. We rush, we worry, we carry burdens quietly, but stories like this remind us that kindness still matters, that bravery still lives in ordinary people, and that sometimes the miracle someone is praying for is you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, so we know how far this little miracle has traveled. And if you believe that God still watches over the broken, still heals the hurting, and still sends unlikely heroes into the storm, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps through every season of your own life. Whether you walk through winter shadows or toward the warm light of a new beginning. Amen.